So with my little sister now having a 16-year-old in my house, oh my gosh, I struggle with guilt of like, did I lead her in the wrong path when I was struggling? And now knowing that God has called me to be a pillar for my family, what does that look like for my older sister and my younger sister? And you know, being open and honest about my struggle, but making it very clear to them that I'm running to God with it. Because for me, what I've noticed is like, you know, a testimony without pointing to God is just kind of something that evokes emotion, feelings, but doesn't really cause a heart transformation. And so I find myself having to constantly point to Christ whenever I talk about this, so that my sisters understand that it wasn't just something I struggled with and overcame and then now I'm free, but that's something I'm leaning on God to guide me in. And so I think including that aspect of Christ, like it has to be Christ centered in order for it to be in order for us to be free, is something that I want to focus on whenever talking to any woman about this. But as far as women who are not Christian, I think that is where I struggle the most with sharing. I share my experiences and I make it very personal to the point where they can understand that it's not so much that I have this expectation for you, because I feel almost like telling someone who doesn't believe in God what to do is like not helpful.
Yeah.
Because you can do everything to the T, but if you don't know God, you will not enter His kingdom.
Definitely.
And so that is an area where I make it personal so that I don't have to kind of like seem like I'm trying to convert people. But I feel like God has He recently convicted me to really in when talking to non-believers, really make it Christ-centered and speak His word to them.
For some time, I considered myself to be like agnostic, or you know, like I believe there's God, like God exists, but that's it. And so in that time, like really, I was a non-believer. And if someone had approached me, even growing up like Catholic or within a church community, I didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't really know how to pray. I didn't know my prayers were like rehearsed prayers, recited. I didn't know what that meant. And so what you said about how do you reach people who are non-believers to get to this point of talking about sexuality. And it has to be first about not like I'm here to save you, but I am here to show you grace and what grace means. And then through that, and then through an authentic relationship with someone, and where vulnerability can be exposed on both sides, then you get to that point of through sharing the gospel, like God, you're demonstrating grace because God has demonstrated grace for you. And so what that means then when someone feels convicted into like how they have been living their life, and having sex or working in prostitution or whatever it looks like in their story. I'm not here to change your story completely, but to offer transformation, and a way to do that. And so for me, that's what happened. In order for me to turn away from how I was living my life, I had to first understand who God was and who Jesus was and that sacrifice that was made. And so that, I think my own story there has informed how I interact with, I think, adults and maybe even older, like adolescent children who may not be, who aren't believers, and need to be exposed to the truth in a way that isn't so much palatable to them, because if that's the case, you're never going to get the message across.
Yeah.
But in a way that they can really, truly, and fully hear the truth without shutting it off. And then I'm thinking about younger children and the ideas that we have permeated around, like, what is promiscuity? And we've mentioned that word a few times. I feel like it's such a loaded word, because what makes something promiscuous, and what really is promiscuity? I remember my sister, when she was in like 6th grade, maybe she wore lip gloss in her school photo, and she got in so much trouble for wearing lip gloss or just playing with makeup. And so the idea of like makeup, is wearing makeup promiscuous? Is it because my shorts are too short or my shoulders are out? Whatever it is, like, what does that mean to be promiscuous? And I think we need to readdress the language that we use around kids. So as adults, how do we educate them on not just sex as intercourse, but who you are as a woman, and as a child of God? And so I think addressing that first, and demonstrating God's grace first, and then those next steps will follow.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, so the word tells us, like, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
Yeah.
And just even the act of sharing, you know, what you've been through, talking about what I didn't know, what the church didn't tell me, and then how I've overcome that. Like, that is a way to, you know, help other women to avoid the places that we've been. But I think also the idea of, like, my testimony can't just end at what happened to me. There has to be this redemptive on-ramp where I'm letting you know the reason my testimony is changed is because of the word of my testimony, the word Christ. Like, I met Christ, and that is why my testimony is different, and why you know, I'm able to stand here on the other side of it. And I do try to present my story in a non-judgmental way, because that definitely kept me back from change for a long time. And like, I felt like Christians judge me, or people in church judge me for things that I did. So I do try to just tell people, like, hey, this is what happened to me. But I think our testimonies are incomplete if we don't present the gospel, that like the only reason that I am different, the only reason that my story has a different end is because of Christ. Like, there, but for the grace of God, go I. So like, I write about it, like, I blog about it. I try to like tell people, like, this is what's happening to me, and even stuff is happening to me right now. Like, I'm still a hot mess there, but for Christ. So that is my go-to. Like, my story has to end in Christ. Yeah.
It's already written to be too.
Yeah, amen. Then God is the hero in my story. It's not just because I cleaned myself up and I decided that I'm going to be celibate, or I decided that I'm not going to be messing around with men or giving my body away foolishly. Like, no, Christ came, rescued me, and redeemed me, and like, that has to be the end of my story. Like,
like this phrase of, we're not fighting for victory, we're fighting from victory. And I often have to tell myself that I'm not fighting for freedom or deliverance, but I'm fighting from freedom and deliverance. And that helps me a lot.